Hello and welcome to Absolutely Not. My name is Katrina Stroh. My pronouns are they, she, he. And real quick, if you appreciate the work that I do here or elsewhere, please visit the Support the Mission page of my website. There are several options to choose from, so please just choose one. The key words for this episode are racism, discrimination, and power. I encourage y'all to look up the definitions of these words and compare them to the definitions you carry with you on a daily basis. If you need help comparing, please let me know. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. BetterHelp allows you to connect with one of 24,000 licensed therapists in a safe and private online environment. You pay just a low flat fee for unlimited therapy with your therapist. Visit www.betterhelp.com/absolutelynot for more information and to get 10% off your first month. This link can be found in the show notes. Today's episode is titled, We Don't Owe You Anything. I'm excited to talk about this with our amazing special guest today, Madison Butler, she, her. Madison, otherwise known as the blue-haired unicorn, is Black and queer as fuck. She is committed to breaking down the status quo and creating environments that allow everyone to thrive. She identifies as Black and queer. Madison, thank you so much for being here today.
I'm so excited. I'm also excited because I can swear, which is wonderful.
Anytime I go in a different space and I don't ask that question like, oh, is this a cussing space or is this not? I'm always surprised at your reactions. Have you ever had reactions like that? Like, why are you cussing in my space?
Or I forget to ask and then I say something and I can like see it on my moderator's face and I'm like, I'm from New England, I'm sorry. I swear a lot. My bad.
That's another form of kind of discrimination or bias that I really don't understand. Like, how does me cussing tell you anything about me? Or like, what does it do for you? Have you ever thought about that? Like, what is it doing to you?
Oh yeah, I get it. So I swear in my own content on LinkedIn. And like, I remember recently, I think I said damn, which is like super baby in the grand scheme of like what I said. And someone was like, do you say that to your mother? And I was like, I will call that woman right now and tell her I fucking love her. Like, and you wanna know what? She's gonna say it back and I'm gonna go on with my day because I am a whole adult. And so it's really interesting to me that people like, I mean, and as someone who has like a degree in the English language, which is neither here nor there, like words are just words in most instances. And like, if I am using a word to express how I feel and the way you decide to try and control my content is through vilifying said word, that very much sounds like a you problem.
And Madison, what do you do with other people's problems? When people confront you with these problems that have nothing to do with you, what do you usually do to those people?
I guess it depends on the level of their problem. So some people come to me and they want to pick my brain for free, to which I tell them Google is still free and they are welcome to utilize it. But then you have the people who their problem with me is so large that they have to risk it all, like willing to risk their job to show up on my content. And, you know, I just feel like if you want the attention, I'm willing to give it to you. So there's a solid chance that if you come to my page and you're a racist or transphobic or xenophobic or one of the other phobias or phobics, you're going to end up on my Twitter and your boss is going to end up with an email, because one of the things about me is I always have the time.
Oh, I often don't have time, honestly. Well, sometimes I have time, but you have time, baby. And I appreciate that. A lot of people on LinkedIn appreciate that because it makes us aware that, oh, these people still out here. Sometimes I'm like, oh, wow, it must be over. Like maybe everybody has turned a new leaf. Madison, do you often think, oh, everyone has turned a new leaf?
Oh, no, I'm a cynic. I don't think anyone is. And it's not that I really have like time in the grand sense of time, but the way that I think about it is, if you are so comfortable harassing me, stranger on the internet, lady you don't know, I know that means you are comfortable bullying someone through Slack or bullying someone through how you hire them or how you do their performance review or how you interact with them in a group project. And so for me, it's not so much about having the time as about recognizing that you're causing harm with a stranger, and that means you're causing harm with the people you know. And for me, that is like the biggest biggest indicator of a red flag is like, if you feel like you can say this in front of your employer, we've got bigger problems.
We have got bigger problems because, and I think about let me say the past 4 years, how many people have become boldened? They have become brave on Mariah Carey's internet. They have been very expressive about their beliefs, even if they are harmful to other people. What do you believe has made these people so brave and so loud?
So, I think a lot of it for me, and this is my personal experience, was when we were kind of getting into like the world of the election, probably give it 2015, end of 2014. There was something that was kind of like awakened in a lot of people by the viewpoints of Trump. And this is not like a political rant by any means. However, we had someone who ran for president and was later president, and his whole claim to fame was like not giving a shit, basically. And at the time, I was with someone who was already really heavily an abuser, but I watched how his behavior changed as we went through the candidacy, went through part of the presidency, and people saw themselves in him. And for the longest time, they thought and knew, I feel these things, but it's inappropriate for me to say them. It's societally unacceptable. But then you put what is considered the greatest country in the world, our leader was saying the things you had been thinking this whole time. And that was being applauded. That was being rallied. That was being set on fire on Twitter. And so when all of these things were happening, people were like, oh, the president can say it. Why can't I say it? Haha. And for me, that is actually, out of all of the things that came out of the presidency, there were a whole mess of things that were detrimental and harmful. But for me, that is the genie that can't be put back in the bottle, because it has nothing to do with political policy. It has nothing to do with who we elect. It has to do with how we coddled these people's ideas and said, oh, they're okay, say them out loud. And then when people ask you about it, you say, don't say anything else, just say freedom of speech. Don't read the Constitution, though, just say freedom of speech. And so for me, that is where it felt like it took a turn. And then pair it with 2020 and George Floyd, and all of a sudden, not only are there crappy thoughts out loud, but now they're being challenged by the status quo. And then you're basically backing people into a corner with their hateful thoughts. And what do people do when they're backed into a corner? They lash out. And so here we are in 2022, where for me, I've had people show up at my house for the content that I post. I get like 5-page long death threats. I have gotten dragged by multiple random Twitter bots. I've gotten, full 30-minute specials from like white supremacist YouTubers. And, I think that's part of it, is like, I think the world gets uglier before it gets better, unfortunately. I told you I'm a cynic.
But no, how many uglies do we have to go through? No, but thank you so much for breaking it down for everyone to understand like where this is coming from. These emotions have been here. These beliefs have been here this whole time, but these discussions haven't been here. That people didn't speak freely about what their beliefs were because they already knew they were causing harm to other people. And now that we are having discussions about, hey, this shit is harmful. Like, we don't want to be harmed in this way anymore. At all, honestly, but in this way, please stop, like publicly. When was the last time you had to tell someone, or when's the last time you told one of these people, like, you are causing me harm?
So I feel like at this point, I don't necessarily I don't ever try to educate these people, because that is like, I'm not doing it for free. Too, you didn't come here for education. But the last time I got like trolled by someone, and at this point, like, unless you're paying a bill, or giving me a direct deposit, or you want to pay me $10,000 for 24 hours of silence, like, I don't care. So in that grand scheme of things, it was right before we got on this call. I have this engineer who was obsessed with me on Twitter, and it's ironic because he was in my DMs in 2020 asking if I could find him a job. So like, I don't know what happened. So it's for me a very common occurrence that people show up on my page to cause harm. And I guess, and this is very like individual for me, but having lived with someone who was an abuser to like the nth tier, I have lived with the world's greatest troll. So I have a hard time like taking any of these people seriously. Because the one thing I know about my ex is he had stuff going on. Like there are things that harmed him that caused him to be harmful. I empathize for people who use the internet to harm people because it makes them feel good. But in the same right, I'm not going to educate them for free. I don't want to. It's not my job. And at the end of the day, I don't do this work to change the hearts and minds of individuals. I don't care about individuals, which sounds very bad. But at the end of the day, I do this work to dismantle the systems that let them thrive. If I spent all of my time trying to change individuals' minds, I would need lots of naps, like more naps than I already need. And for me, there are going to be people who, no matter how much coddling, education, workshopping, conversation, books we give them, they don't want to change. They benefit from a system. And so I can't spend my time working on individuals. I spend my time dismantling systems. So yes, I guess I could educate them, but I would need them to pay an invoice.
As they should, as they should. There are a lot of people who are still kind of wrapped up in like this Disney fairy tale dream of like, well, if I just like kiss them awake or I love them, then they will change, and like Snow White eat the apple, a whole fairy tale. When did you stop believing in the fairy tales that you could change somebody's life just by educating them?
Oh God, unfortunately for me, I don't think I ever had that.
Oh.
And again, I think that goes back to like, I lived with someone who I loved with everything, and he still turned around and broke my jaw. So like, you can't love someone into good behavior. You can't love someone into being a good person. You can't love someone into meeting you at the table. And so I think because I lived that and I was so young, I was in my early 20s, I learned that like, you cannot love people into love. And I think the other thing for me is, as someone who, my whole role at my company is to make sure that my employees are safe. And it is not fair for them, for me to try and love someone into being a good person while they're being harmed by that same person, and making them sit next to someone who's an abuser to them, who's someone who causes them harm. And at the end of the day, like, I'm a really big believer in like, y'all have had 400 plus years of space and grace. So at least with me, the space and grace thing doesn't go over as well.
Space and grace, space and grace. And I love that you're using the term love, because, well, a lot of people are going to hear that and be like, well, that's personal relationships. That has nothing to do with work. Like at work, we should be forthcoming and empathetic and educational. I love that you're talking about it, even in the sense of work. Like we just can't do that. Safety is priority. Have you ever come in contact with somebody or at your organizations that you worked with who were like, no, safety shouldn't be a priority. We should allow love to happen? What were those conversations like?
Yes. I mean, I actually recently, and it wasn't someone I work with, but I was doing a keynote and I was talking about the trauma of racism. And this woman like raised her hand and she was like, don't you feel facetious calling it trauma? She was like, it's really just uncomfortable. And I was like, no, absolutely not. And she was like, you can't fire people for making mistakes. And I was like, listen, I get it. And I say this every time I educate, like, you're never going to get this right. But we also are in full control of the mistakes we make. And then not only the mistakes we make, but what we do once we realize we've made the mistake. Too many of us live in our ego, and it sucks to fail. It feels shitty to fail. And so instead of being like, wow, I got your pronouns wrong, I'm going to do better the next time, you say, I don't believe in that. I can't use they, them. The English language doesn't let me. And so for me, that's a problem, because now you let your mistake guide your ego, and now your ego's being a fucking asshole. So yes, I find that is really common. And then you also find practitioners even who are really into like the restorative justice piece of this. And for me, I am just about the justice piece of this. At the end of the day, like if your Black, brown, queer folks are not protected because you're too busy coddling whiteness into being a good person, then you've done the opposite.
Then you have done the opposite. And I love that you once again are talking about people's perceptions of what is and what isn't. Even in that woman's statement, like, how is that trauma? That's centering whiteness, baby. Just because you don't go through it doesn't mean people are not going through it. And it is wild to me, which is why it's such a huge part of this show, that people's definitions of words, especially talking about safety or mental health or anything in that matter, are so different from my own. It's very strange to me. When was the last time you had to tell someone, oh, our definitions are very different? I don't think we can continue this conversation.
It was probably that conversation because I was like, listen, like for me, uncomfortable is when my sock is wet. My sock is wet and then I can change my sock. I can step away from being uncomfortable. Trauma, I cannot step away from. That is not something I can take off at 5 p.m. when I leave the office like a sweater. And so I think in this case, like we don't see eye to eye because you have never thought to think differently about how the rest of us exist at work. Mm-hmm. And as a white woman, you probably have often use your own victimization to further marginalize people of color and Black women. And I was like, so I think right now we're not going to see eye to eye, but I encourage you, when you leave this room, think about this conversation and then go read and research and look up articles and books by people who don't look like you on the same topic. And we don't have to come back together to discuss, but I hope you choose to discuss it with yourself or maybe some of your peers.
Look, that is an example right there, everyone. That is an example of what you can say to somebody like, wow, we definitely don't see eye to eye on this. I will not educate you because I don't have the time. You ain't paying me. And so I will walk away, but I hope that you continue this conversation on your own time. Thank you so much for allowing us to hear that example. I love that you are about this shit because a lot of people in this space kind of are not about this shit. You talked about the different types of practitioners and what they focus on. Have you come in contact with some practitioners who are not about this shit? Because I'm really worried about that.
Yes. And I always say, like, I'm with the shits. I think the biggest difference is practitioners who are my age versus practitioners who are 15 years older than me, which doesn't seem like a giant gap, but the way we were talking about DEI 15 years ago is not what we're talking about today. We weren't really talking about anti-racism in the way that we're talking about it today. And so they really came from this place of like, we just want white people to like us. We just want them to be better. And for me, I do not care. I do not care if white people like me. I don't need to be liked. I need to survive when I step outside my front door or even being behind my front door. And so I was recently on a panel, and I guess it's not actually recently because the time is moving very quickly, but Black History Month, I was on a panel and someone asked the question about, how do you approach white people who are just doing it wrong? And it was me, someone else, and a CDO. And the CDO is probably 20 years my senior. And his answer was like, we just have to give them space and we just have to give them grace and ha, ha, ha. And I was like, cool. But as long as there's a wealth gap, like I don't have room or time to give people space and grace when, again, people are not only being harmed, but they're being displaced from where they live, where they work. And to be quite honest, like we all have a responsibility in how we show up. And it can't be that you wait for your CDO to pull you aside to be like, oh, that thing you said, it was so mean. Let's talk about it. For me, that is not how we operate, but I do understand where that makes a lot of white people feel safe. It makes them come to the table. And that may work for a lot of people. And one of the things I say when I interview potential clients is like, I may not be the practitioner for you. I am not warm and fluffy. We're not going to do this to like put a badge on your vest. I'm not going to make you feel good. I recently read the book Biased with my book club. And that was my biggest issue with the book is it was like, well, we're all biased, so it's fine. And I was like, is it fine? Is it fine? And that's okay if I'm not the right practitioner for you because you have to pick who's right for your organization. But there are lots of practitioners who still center whiteness in how they educate. And at the end of the day, if you're still centering whiteness and you're centering white comfort, you're centering white supremacy while trying to dismantle it. And that's not how it works.
And that is not how it works. Thank you so much for breaking that down for the practitioners that are in this space who needed to hear that. And maybe they tired of hearing it from me or other practitioners. So hearing it from you will definitely be the cup of tea that they sip. Because the first word that came to my mind is insanity. Like you cannot continue to do the same thing or perpetrate the same systems and then expect for something to change. It just will not change. Thank you so much for bringing that in this space. Your work sounds tiring as fuck. Like it sounds so taxing and so tiring. My body, and I'm just listening to it. How are you remaining whole in this? Are there people in your space that keep you whole?
So I think for me, I have 5 dogs. I think that's great. I have 2 partners who are lovely human beings, but knowing my own boundaries, and also like the biggest life hack was turning off my notifications to all my social media. So I can like be snarky and then I can like exit the chat. I love that about the internet. I also hate that about the internet, but I love it. For me, it's really, again, about knowing my boundaries, understanding my needs, understanding when I am hitting a wall. And maybe that means I need to go just read a book, like go read something fiction, go take a nap, go sit on the beach. It definitely is. It is the hiring, but I'm always in that mindset of like, okay, if not me, then who? And there's also a ton of privilege in being able to say the things I say and get on a platform and say them. And as long as I have that privilege, I feel like it's my responsibility to say the things that not everyone is safe to say. And there's power in that, and being able to reach people and have conversation and educate when I choose to, for me, is worth being tired.
Oh, I don't know.
But also I really like reality TV. That helps. That's like my like escape is I'll like watch the 90 Day Fiance.
Oh, and for anyone who is listening to this, who's like, yeah, I'm tired as fuck too. Like, I'm tired. This work is hard. I hope that you're hearing this, that you have to even it out somewhere. Go watch 90 Day Fiance. Go turn off your notifications. Take a step back. You don't have to be on 24/7. You do have the privilege and power to, and I'm glad that you're using it to do great work. But yeah, unplug, do what you need to do. Thank you so much for sharing that today. I love that you also brought the words privilege and power in this space. What kind of privilege and power are you bringing to your work, or how are you utilizing that?
So I think for me, I know that a lot of the things I say scare employers, like right out the door. I am super privileged to have a CEO who like backs my play, and that is privilege and power in its own right, because I am 30, I sit at the leadership table, I report to the CEO, and at the end of the day, he knows exactly what I post on LinkedIn. But being able to have a following of 106,000 followers without having gotten kicked off LinkedIn yet, there's privilege in knowing that I can access rooms that I would never be able to access if it was just me, myself, and my blue hair. Being able to access founders, CEOs, VCs, and even if it just challenges them to think about something differently, then I feel like I've done my job. And in the same right, knowing that like people are going to show up to risk it for the biscuit. If your employer sees you risking it and that changes their perception of you, then I've done my job.
Oh, I appreciate that. Social media is such a weird fucking place. It's like, I don't even know what it is, but it's good to know that there are people out there who understand what it is and what they can use it for, and the voices that they're uplifting by utilizing those spaces. I recently read an article about like a lot of disabled content creators can't leave social media, no matter how harmful it is, because it's like the only way to get in those rooms, to get in those doors. It's inspiring, but it's also like a, what's the word? Double-edged sword. It's like really weird. You can't leave it, but you need it. Very strange. What made you start using LinkedIn, I guess, or start being this person in that space on that platform?
I don't really know. Well, I kind of know. But so I had LinkedIn because I started my career in recruiting world. So for people who don't know, I'm a VP of people now. So I've kind of like done the people stuff. So LinkedIn is kind of a requirement when you're hiring and recruiting. But ironically, probably 4 or 5 years ago, I had a boss who was a white dude, and he had a great LinkedIn presence, like great LinkedIn presence. And when he interviewed me, he was like, oh, like, do you use like your LinkedIn, like content to hire people? And I was like, huh? Like, what are you talking about? And he was like, well, if you had a lot of followers, you would be able to just post a job and people would come to you. In my brain, I was like, oh, I never thought about that. That's probably a hack. And so I started writing some like pretty like okay content. I was just writing about the things I noticed were broken in recruiting, which there's enough things that I could have content for the next 10 years. And he had come to me at one point and was like, okay, so I see you're writing content. I see it's getting traction, but like, you're not really showing up to your content, like in the way that I see you daily. So why? And I was like, because I like being employed. I like having a job. And he challenged me to write differently and think differently. And so I started writing what I consider like my spicier content. And what I would do is I would like, when you like send a spicy text message, I would like write my content and then shut my laptop and be like, okay, I'm gonna go like do a dish. I'm gonna do a dish. I'm gonna come back to that later because I'm really nervous about what people think. And you know, 5-ish years later, I write my content and I don't give a shit what anyone thinks. I just write it and then I go. And it's funny because oftentimes I'm like, oh, how can you have a real job? You spend so much time on LinkedIn. I put out content most days, and most days it does not take me longer than 7 minutes to write my content. So like, I guess someone tell my boss I took 7 minutes at 9 a.m. to write my content, but I've been really consistent ever since. And I've moved, I still talk about recruiting and hiring, and because I think HR is gross and broken and I live there. But I really, like for me, like my page is for Black women and Black queer folk. And like, at the end of the day, like that's who I do this for, because those are the people, one, my experience is mirrored in the experience I can talk about most closely, but those are the people who I want to see win. Those are the people who are the most harmed at work. And so at the end of the day, like if I can make someone's life better by writing my content, then I feel good.
I love it. I love it. I love that. Also, huge shout out to whoever that boss person was. Like, if you are an organizational leader who doesn't see your people on LinkedIn, or encourage them, challenge them, like, yo, show up, be yourself, be authentic. I know they're using those words loosely nowadays, but be for real and be real in all spaces. It's really hard for me right now. I'm trying to like be on other platforms and I feel myself being spicy over here and being not spicy over here. I'm like, yo, we can't do this. We already here. Like, we can't backtrack. How important was it for you to be spicy everywhere and know how spicy you are? Like, I love that you're Black as fuck, queer as fuck. That brings the spice. Like, how important is that in being your authentic self, even on LinkedIn?
I feel like my other platforms are like a little bit spicier in different ways. Like if you go on my Twitter and my Instagram, I definitely have like pro ho in my bio. And I talk a lot about body positivity and like what that actually means, and not like the weird body positivity movement that exists. Like just like being happy in the body that you have. And that's going to look different for me than it is for you, than it is for Lizzo, than it is for Kylie Jenner. Like if you want to go get your butt done, get your butt done. If you want to get your boobs done, get your boobs done. You want to have abs, go get abs, girl. Like do it up. And so for me, like I talk a lot about what that means for me. And like, that's been a journey in itself. I am pretty spicy on Twitter. I'm pretty spicy on Instagram. Like there's definitely pictures of my butt cheeks on both of those platforms. My boss follows me, like, great. Love it. Love that for me. I do try to stay like pretty consistent in like who I am as a person on all of those platforms. I don't necessarily like use Facebook for this. I use Facebook. I'm like an actual shit poster. I just post a lot of memes. But I've really tried. I mean, Twitter is hard for me. I've wanted to be better at Twitter than I am, but I'm not like a great, like, oh, I'm having a cool thought, I should tweet it. I haven't gotten really that good at that yet. I'm trying.
But I'm so glad that you are aware of that. Like there are a lot of people who are like, okay, let me continue to be in a box here. And then I'll be, oh, pro ho over here, or I'll be spicy over here and stuff. When did you start realizing I can't do that anymore? I can't separate the two. I have to be one whole being.
So I think it goes back to honestly when I was working with that guy, and I was really thinking about, so one of the things when I got out of my abusive relationship, I unfortunately, like our breakup went viral, made BuzzFeed. And that was like a very harrowing moment for my like young 20-something self, where the whole world was judging me. And I was like, wow, like I've done all this work to be exactly the opposite of what they're viewing me as. And no matter what, they're still viewing me as nothing but a Black woman. So like, fuck, I should just show up there. And so I made a commitment to myself to not show up differently in my friendships, my relationships with my family. But a couple of years later, I like remember it vividly. I had an interview at a company before I was working for this guy. And they were like, oh my God, we love you. And we're so conditioned to say like, oh my God, thanks. You want to work with me? Like, lucky me. And they were like, we like you, but, and I was like, oh no, but, and they were like, we need you to dye your hair a natural color. We need you to cover your tattoos. We need to take out your nose ring and need to wear a skirt. And we don't allow like open toe or backless shoes. And I was like standing there in Birkenstocks. And at the time I was like, oh my God, like, thank you so much for thinking of me. Send me the offer letter. And then on my way home, I remember I was gripping my steering wheel so tight it hurt my hands, and I was seeing red because I realized how many companies have wanted to work with me but didn't give a shit about who I was, what I did outside of my 9 to 5. And I was like, okay, so I made myself this promise to be authentic and real in all my relationships, but not at work. When isn't work just another relationship? Isn't that just another extension of who I am every day? And so I went home and I was like, what can I do to put on my LinkedIn so people know I won't change? And so like, alas, the blue-haired recruiter was born. Because I put it in my headline. I was like, well, now they know I won't change my hair. And so then I remember interviewing with that same guy, and I was like, by the way, my hair is blue. And he was like, yes, I have eyes. I don't care. And I was like, oh my God, yay. So now I've had blue hair for 6 years. Which is really rad. But that was for me when I realized I didn't want to be two people. Being two people every day is exhausting. Going to work and turning on your phone voice so you sound nicer isn't that fun. Straightening your hair till it breaks off is not that fun. Wearing loafers, not that fun. And I just didn't want to be two people anymore because I'm really good at what I do, just like this.
I hope somebody heard that. You can do your job with blue hair. You can do your job with you without a skirt on. You can do your job just as the person that you are. And I think there are so many organizations who are just unaware of that. Why, Madison, why do you think they're unaware of that?
Because it takes the power out of their hands. We have been trained to be professional, which is literally just a mirror image of whiteness. And if they can't control the narrative, then they can't control you. They can't control how you operate, how you act. But we've been told that straighten your hair and smile nice and sound nice because it's white. It's the white thing to do. And that's why for me, I've retired the word professional from my vocabulary because it was not meant for me. It was not meant for you. It was meant for us to stay in line and assimilate. And that is not something that I'm willing to do. And so as long as they could say, be this other person, they had full control of who you were day in and day out. And eventually that bleeds into your real life. There's no way for you to stop it. There's no like border where you're like, okay, 5 a.m. step over the line and now I'm a different person. You start to doubt your own name. You start to doubt who you are. And then you start thinking, well, why am I not good enough as is? And that's not fair. And it's not true.
And again, we talk about those definitions again, because somebody's like, well, I can be professional every day. I love wearing suits. Okay, that's you, homie. Like, you don't have to dye your hair. You don't have to straighten your hair. You don't have to change shit about you, which is why it's not harmful to you, but it's harmful to so many people that look like me and share my identities. And that's just something I hope that everyone heard from you because they need to hear it. I appreciate you sharing that. There are going to be a lot of people who are listening to this who are like, shit, I don't want to be two people anymore. I'm going to go talk to my boss about not being two people anymore. What would be the top 3 tips you would share with them about starting to set boundaries at work or having that conversation with their boss?
So I think for me, and this is the hardest one, but the most important one, and it's not so much a tip as it's just a thing. Not everyone is going to like the real you. And that is okay. It just matters that you like the real you. For me, that is like the number one part of human nature is like we crave acceptance, we crave community, we crave togetherness. But when you show up in your own voice as whoever it is you are, the right people will find you and the wrong people will leave. And initially that's going to feel bad, but that's okay. I think the second one is knowing what those boundaries are, especially if you're in the hunt for a new role, and knowing those boundaries up front and also saying them. It's okay to say, hey, at 5 p.m. I log off because I want to walk my dog, or I want to go to my kid's t-ball game, or I would actually just like to maybe go to the gym. Whatever it is, be open with your boundaries. They don't need to be some giant, well-kept secret because then they're not boundaries. They're just like hopeful wishes. And 3, at the end of the day, the most important part of all of this is always going to be you, your mental health, your safety, your ability to thrive. And if at any point you feel like those things are compromised, come find me. We'll find you something new. But please don't stay in a space that doesn't deserve you. I think it goes back to what I said. We're so conditioned to feel lucky when companies want us. When in actuality, if they have people who want to work for someone else's dream, I would say that they're the lucky ones. And instead of thinking, because I know I've always felt like this, these rooms weren't made for me. I wasn't made for these rooms. It's not about that. It is about what rooms deserve me here. And so always question that. Does this room deserve you? And I promise you, if they're causing you pain and they're causing you harm, they don't.
Does this room deserve you? My goodness, so many people. I hope somebody heard that. And I hope they go into their room or their office tomorrow and just say, well, damn, y'all really don't deserve me. Don't pay me enough. You have asked me to do a whole bunch of shit that has literally disrupted my mental health. I don't think y'all deserve me in this room. I would like to leave. Let's talk about that. I love that so much. Thank you for bringing that energy here. I am trying desperately not to cry because there is a younger version of myself who just needed that single line of, does this room deserve me? Not do I deserve to be in this room, but do y'all even, okay, let me backtrack. Somebody said I did that last month and I left, but baby, Madison said, we love to see it. Before we wrap it up today, are there any last minute sprinkles that you'd like to share with the audience?
I guess just knowing that when it feels like you're not good enough, that's not you talking. It is the things we've learned from society. It is the things we've learned from our crappy bosses. It's the things we've learned from our shitty exes. And you're always good enough. Even on your worst day, it's just a day. You're very much worth all of it, and you are good enough at 100. You don't need to dial it down or turn it up. You can just be as is, and that's enough, and that's okay.
And that's enough, and that's okay. I do have to go because I'm finna cry my way out. Someone said I definitely needed to hear that. I have the worst imposter syndrome. A lot of us have a lot of things about imposter syndrome, but we will not get into that today. So thank you so much for everyone who has shared in the chat. I hope that you take away that you are enough. You don't have to do shit else for these people. They paying you. Keep saying absolutely not to everything that's unaligned and setting those boundaries. We'll see you next time. Bye.